I said leave, Richard barked, pointing toward the door. You don't belong here and you're making my customers uncomfortable. His voice echoed across the marble floors. Elaine Carter stood in the middle of the luxury store, her heart pounding as the confrontation escalated. Elaine, calm but resolute, didn't flinch. Her hands tightened around the strap of her bag as she looked Richard directly in the eye. I have every right to be here, she said firmly, her voice steady. And I'm not going anywhere. Around them, the store fell silent. Customers who had been browsing moments before now stopped to watch, their whispers buzzing like static. Some pulled out their phones to record the unfolding scene, while others exchanged nervous glances. You're disturbing the peace here, Richard, the luxury store manager, continued, his face flushed with anger. This store is for serious shoppers, not window browsers who can't afford anything. Elaine's jaw tightened, but her composure didn't waver. Is that what you think I am? She asked quietly. Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of her dignity. A window browser? Richard scoffed, folding his arms. Look, I don't have time for this. You're wasting my time and everyone else's. Just get out, or I'll call the cops. Was Richard right to demand Elaine leave the store because he thinks she doesn't belong? As we dive into how it all started, if you don't support prejudice and racism, click the subscribe button now and tell us where you are watching from. Only those who support prejudice won't subscribe. Now, the events of that day hadn't started with fireworks. For Elaine, it had been a peaceful morning. She had woken early, brewed her favorite cup of coffee, and taken a moment to reflect on how far she had come. The city outside her window bustled with life, but Elaine had learned to find stillness amid the chaos. Today was special. It wasn't just another day. It marked a milestone. Elaine had recently finalized the acquisition of several businesses, including one of the city's most renowned luxury chains. For years, she had dreamed of building her empire, and now, after decades of hard work and resilience, she had achieved it. Her thoughts drifted back to her childhood. She remembered standing outside high-end stores with her mother, peering through the windows at the beautiful things they couldn't afford. Someday, her mother had whispered, you'll have more than you could ever dream of. Those words had stayed with her, becoming a guiding principle. Elaine had worked tirelessly to build her success, always staying grounded and true to her values. And now, as the new owner of the very chain she once admired from afar, she decided to visit one of her stores quietly, without fanfare or an entourage. She wanted to experience it the way any customer would. Dressed in her favorite shirt and slacks, she stepped into the luxury store that morning with a sense of quiet pride. The marble floors gleamed under the light of crystal chandeliers, and the displays sparkled with carefully arranged designer handbags, jewelry, and accessories. Elaine's eyes landed on a handbag she recognized from her childhood, a timeless design she had once dreamed of owning. She smiled to herself, taking her time as she admired the craftsmanship. It wasn't just about the bag, it was about the journey it represented. But her peace was short-lived. From across the store, Richard had spotted her almost immediately. He had watched her, his expression shifting from curiosity to disdain as he made assumptions based solely on her appearance. In his eyes, Elaine didn't belong. Elaine hadn't noticed him at first. She was too focused on the items in front of her, her mind wandering to memories of her past. But as she moved to another section of the store, she became aware of his presence. He followed her closely, his eyes scrutinizing her every move. At first, he approached her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning," he said, his tone overly polite. "Can I help you find something?" "I'm just browsing, thank you," Elaine replied with a warm smile, turning her attention back to the display. But Richard didn't move. He lingered, his gaze narrowing slightly. You should check out other stores, he added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. This place is not for people like you. You might find something more in your price range in another store that's not luxury like ours. Elaine's smile faded, but she didn't respond. She moved to another display, determined not to let his assumptions ruin her day. But Richard persisted. You know, he said, louder this time, ensuring other customers could hear, we get a lot of window shoppers here, people who just want to look but aren't serious buyers. Elaine stopped slowly. She turned to face him, her expression calm but firm. Is that what you think I am? She asked quietly. Richard smirked. I've been in this business a long time. I know who's serious and who isn't. The humiliation stung, but Elaine refused to let it show. She met his gaze without flinching. I don't believe it's your job to decide that, she said. Her tone was steady, but there was an edge to it that made Richard falter for a moment. If you believe people still get treated like this in stores, click the subscribe button now for justice. Nearby, a few customers had begun to notice the interaction. Whispers spread through the store as people glanced in Elaine's direction. Tanya, the young sales associate, stood frozen behind a counter, her expression torn between discomfort and fear of speaking up. As Richard continued to hover, Elaine noticed a woman in an expensive outfit moving quietly near the jewelry display. She watched as the woman was treated well and fairly, like a queen, while she herself was met with mockery and humiliation. Elaine's eyes narrowed slightly, but before she could say anything, Richard's voice cut through her thoughts. I think it's time for you to leave, he said sharply. Richard's frustration was palpable as he continued to follow Elaine through the store. His sharp gaze never left her, and with every step she took, his condescension grew more blatant. He seemed determined to make her feel out of place. Elaine walked with quiet grace, her focus shifting between the displays of elegant handbags and sparkling jewelry. But Richard wasn't about to let her browse in peace. He stepped in front of her as she approached the handbag display she had admired earlier. I think we've established that this section might not be for you, he said loudly, his smirk widening as other customers turned to watch. His voice echoed through the marble-floored store, carrying a mix of fake politeness and underlying disdain. Perhaps the clearance section in the back would be a better fit. Elaine's calm expression didn't waver. She tilted her head slightly, her voice soft but steady. And what makes you think this section isn't for me? Richard's smirk faded momentarily, but he quickly recovered. Let's just say I've been in this business long enough to know who belongs here and who doesn't. A murmur rippled through the store. Nearby, customers whispered to each other. Why doesn't she just leave? One woman asked quietly, glancing at Elaine with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Another man shifted uncomfortably, muttering under his breath, This is getting awkward. Elaine ignored them, her focus unwavering. She tried to move around Richard, but he stepped sideways, blocking her path again. His actions were deliberate, his posture unyielding. Loitering isn't allowed here, he said with a sharp edge in his tone. If you're not buying anything, maybe it's time to move along. What would you do if someone treated you like this in a store? Let us know in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button if you enjoy the story and find it important. Don't forget to like and share with someone who needs to hear it. Elaine's jaw tightened slightly, but she maintained her composure. Loitering? She repeated. I didn't realize admiring the merchandise qualified as loitering. Richard crossed his arms, his smirk returning. Admiring isn't the same as buying. Tanya, the sales rep standing behind the counter near the jewelry section, watched everything unfold. Her hands gripped the edge of the display case, her knuckles white. She had seen the tension between Richard and Elaine escalate. Tanya's chest tightened as she debated what to do. She knew Richard's reputation. He was ruthless with employees who crossed him. If she spoke up, she risked not only his wrath but possibly her job. Yet she couldn't ignore the growing injustice playing out before her. Her gaze flicked between Richard, who was now gesturing toward the store's entrance, and Elaine, who remained steadfast. She took a step forward, hesitated, and then stepped back again. Fear and morality waged a silent war within her. Do you think Tanya should step in and risk her job or stay silent to protect herself? Tell us what you would do in her situation, and don't forget to click the subscribe button now. Richard's voice cut through the tension like a blade. If you don't leave now, he said, his tone sharp and final, I'll call the cops. The murmurs among the customers grew louder. Richard, oblivious to everything but his own agenda, continued to escalate. You've wasted enough of my time, he said, his voice louder now, as though addressing the entire store. You're not buying anything, and you're not welcome here. As this exchange unfolded, another customer in the store observed the chaos with quiet interest. Amanda, a white woman in her early 40s, had been welcomed nicely earlier while Elaine was being humiliated. Dressed in an immaculate cream blouse and tailored pants, her expensive leather bag hung loosely on her shoulder, exuding wealth and sophistication. Amanda moved with calculated ease, her sharp eyes scanning the jewelry display. While Richard's attention remained fixed on Elaine, Amanda seized her moment. She reached for a sparkling diamond necklace displayed under the glass. Her hand lingered as though admiring it before she quickly slipped the necklace into her bag. She glanced around, her movements smooth and practiced, her expression calm. Elaine caught the motion out of the corner of her eye. Her gaze shifted briefly toward Amanda, taking in the theft with a quiet realization. Amanda's demeanor was confident, almost brazen, as she moved to another section of the store, selecting a bracelet this time. With the same fluid motion, she slipped it into her bag. Richard, oblivious to the theft happening mere feet away, gestured toward the entrance. If you refuse to leave, I'll have no choice but to call the authorities, he said, his tone cold and final. Elaine tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady. Maybe you should, she said, her calm response catching him off guard. Richard hesitated for a moment before pulling out his phone. Fine, he snapped. I'll have the cops escort you out and deal with you. As Richard dialed, Amanda moved toward the store's exit, her bag now noticeably fuller, swinging gently at her side. She kept her steps measured, her face serene, blending seamlessly with the high-end clientele. Elaine's gaze followed her, sharp and focused. Despite the chaos surrounding her, she didn't miss a single detail. The thief's actions were bold, but Elaine's composure remained unbroken. Elaine's eyes followed Amanda's movements, but she said nothing. Her calm composure remained unbroken even as the tension in the store reached a breaking point. Customers whispered louder now, their phones capturing every moment of the standoff. Elaine noticed Amanda's actions but said nothing, her calm gaze lingering on the thief for a moment before returning to Richard, who was now speaking loudly into the phone. Yes, I need officers at my store immediately, he said, his voice laced with authority. We have a woman causing a disturbance and refusing to leave. I'm concerned she may escalate further. Richard ended the call with a satisfied look, his posture straightening as he turned back to Elaine. Security will be here shortly, he said. I suggest you cooperate when they arrive. Elaine didn't respond. She stood quietly, her eyes scanning the room as the tension grew thicker. Minutes later, the glass doors at the front of the store swung open and two uniformed police officers entered. Their presence immediately silenced the whispers among the customers. Richard stepped forward eagerly, his voice confident and loud. "Officers, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing toward Elaine. This woman has been loitering and causing a disturbance. She's refusing to leave, and I believe she may pose a threat." One officer, tall with a commanding presence, nodded. "We'll take care of it," he said. Elaine opened her mouth to speak, but the second officer, a petite woman with a stern expression, held up a hand to stop her. "Ma'am," she said firmly, "we're going to need you to leave the premises." Elaine frowned, her calm demeanor beginning to show cracks. "Excuse me," she said. "You haven't even asked for my side of the story." The male officer stepped closer, his tone leaving little room for argument. "We're not here to debate. The manager has made it clear that you're no longer welcome here. Please leave now, or we'll have to escort you out." Richard stood behind the officers, his smirk widening as he watched the scene unfold. Customers whispered louder now, their phones capturing every moment. Tanya, the young sales associate, stood frozen behind the counter, her hands gripping the edge tightly. Elaine remained still, her gaze shifting between the officers and Richard. "You're taking his word without even questioning what's happening here?" she asked. The female officer's expression hardened. "Ma'am, we were called because you're causing a disturbance. If you don't comply, we'll have to remove you." The tension in the store was suffocating, the air heavy with anticipation. Richard stood near Elaine, his smirk still lingering but less assured. Customers whispered among themselves, some filming discreetly while others openly gawked. Amanda, the white customer who had been slowly inching toward the exit, kept her head low, confident she would slip away unnoticed. If you're hooked on this story so far, like this video and hit the subscribe button if you believe in justice. Suddenly, the doors to the store swung open. A sleek black car pulled up just outside, its polished surface gleaming under the sunlight. Two sharply dressed men entered first, their presence commanding immediate attention. Behind them, a tall woman in a tailored suit strode in with an air of authority that turned every head in the room. The murmurs grew louder, curiosity rippling through the crowd. The two men and the woman walked straight toward Elaine, their steps deliberate. They stopped just in front of her, and one of the men smiled warmly. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice respectful. "Sorry we're late. Are you ready for the walkthrough?" For the first time, Richard's confident demeanor faltered. His face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Customers gasped, their shock evident as they began to piece together what was happening. Tanya, the young sales associate, brought a trembling hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Elaine turned to Richard, her expression calm but commanding. Her voice carried a quiet strength as she said, "I'm Elaine Carter, the new owner of this store, and I believe we have a lot to discuss." The room fell into stunned silence. Richard looked as though the floor had been pulled out from beneath him. He stammered, his usual arrogance replaced by sheer panic. "You're the owner?" Elaine's gaze didn't waver. "That's correct," she replied. "And I've been watching how you run things. I must say it's been enlightening." Before Richard could respond, Elaine raised a hand, silencing him. She turned slightly, her eyes landing on Amanda, who was just steps away from the door. Elaine's calm demeanor hardened, her voice cutting through the silence. "Before we go any further," she said, "you might want to check that customer's bag." The statement hit the room like a thunderclap. Every head turned toward Amanda, whose body stiffened as the spotlight suddenly fell on her. Her hand froze on the door handle, and her face drained of color. Richard blinked, clearly confused. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice shaky. Elaine took a deliberate step forward, her gaze locked on Amanda. "I saw her slip a bracelet and a necklace into her bag," she said, her tone unwavering. "While you were busy harassing me, she was busy stealing from the store." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Customers whispered furiously, some lifting their phones to record the unfolding drama. Amanda, who had been so confident moments before, now looked like a cornered animal. Her lips trembled as she stammered, This is ridiculous. Elaine ignored her protest, turning back to Richard. Would you like to handle this, she said coolly, or should I? Richard, now visibly sweating, looked toward Amanda. I'm sure this is a misunderstanding, he said weakly. She doesn't seem like the type to... Elaine cut him off. The type? She repeated, her voice sharp. You mean the type you assume is innocent based on how they look? While I, the owner of this store, am treated like I don't belong? At that moment, 2 security guards entered the store, alerted by the escalating tension. Elaine turned to them and pointed toward Amanda. Check her bag, she instructed calmly. I think you'll find what you're looking for. Amanda's composure shattered. You have no right, she shouted, clutching her bag tightly. This is an invasion of privacy. One of the guards stepped forward. Ma'am, we'll need to verify this, he said firmly. Please hand over your bag. Amanda hesitated, her face flushing with humiliation as every eye in the store watched her. Finally, under the weight of their stares, she handed over the bag, her hands trembling. The guards opened it, and within seconds the evidence was clear. A sparkling diamond bracelet and an elegant necklace sat nestled among her belongings, their price tags still attached. Gasps filled the air, and several customers muttered in disbelief. She was stealing the whole time, someone whispered. And we all thought... Amanda tried to stammer out an excuse. I was going to pay for those, I just forgot. Elaine raised a hand, silencing her. Save it, she said coldly. I saw exactly what you did. The guards escorted Amanda to the back office, her protests growing weaker as she disappeared from view. Elaine turned back to Richard, her expression firm. This is the culture you've created, she said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. Targeting people like me while ignoring real criminals. That ends today. Richard stammered, trying to find words, but none came. His arrogance had crumbled completely, leaving only shame and fear in its place. Elaine turned to the staff and customers, her voice steady and clear. The store will no longer tolerate discrimination or incompetence, she said. From now on, we will lead with fairness, respect, and integrity. As the crowd murmured in agreement, Elaine glanced at Tanya, who stood frozen near the counter. Tanya, Elaine said, her tone softening. I've seen your potential. You're part of the solution here. Tanya blinked, her eyes welling with tears as she nodded. Thank you, Miss Carter, she whispered. Elaine gave her a small smile before turning back to Richard. As for you, she said, her voice turning icy, your time here is done. The store erupted into applause as Richard slumped, his face pale. Elaine had turned the tide completely, exposing both the thief and the prejudice that had tainted the store's reputation. The store buzzed with tension as Elaine turned back to Richard, her posture straight and commanding. The echoes of Amanda's removal by security guards still lingered, but Elaine wasn't done. She fixed her gaze on Richard, who stood frozen in place, his arrogance replaced by visible discomfort. This, Elaine began, her voice sharp yet composed, is what happens when you judge people by their appearance. While you were busy treating me like a criminal, the real thief was walking out with your merchandise. Richard stammered, his face pale. I was just doing my job, he muttered weakly, avoiding eye contact with Elaine. Elaine raised an eyebrow, her expression unyielding. Your job? She repeated, her tone cutting through the silence. Your job is to treat every customer with respect, regardless of how they look. Instead, you failed miserably. Not just me, but this store, your staff, and everyone watching here today. Customers whispered among themselves, their phones still raised to capture every word. Elaine's calm but pointed demeanor commanded the room. Tanya, the young sales associate, stood nearby, her expression a mix of relief and admiration as she watched Elaine take control. Have you ever experienced or witnessed discrimination like this? Click the subscribe button and share your story in the comments below. Richard, struggling to maintain his composure, tried to defend himself. Look, I wasn't trying to offend anyone. I thought... Elaine interrupted him, her voice firm. You thought what? That I didn't belong here? That I couldn't possibly afford to shop in this store? You assumed based on nothing but your own prejudice. Richard's mouth opened, but no words came out. The silence in the room was deafening as Elaine continued. You've embarrassed this store and tarnished its reputation, and more importantly, you've shown your true colors for everyone here to see. She turned slightly, addressing the customers and staff. This is not the culture I want in my store, she said, her voice carrying a clear message. This is a place for everyone, where respect is not optional. Richard's face reddened further as he realized there was no escape. I didn't mean for it to come across that way, he stammered, his voice shaky. I was just trying to maintain the store's standards. Elaine's gaze hardened. And what standards are those? Exclusion? Disrespect? Humiliation? She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. You're fired. The room erupted into applause, a mix of vindication and approval. Customers cheered softly, some clapping while others nodded in agreement. Tanya exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her shoulders relaxing for the first time all day. Richard, on the other hand, stood motionless, his face a picture of shock and defeat. You can't do this, he muttered, his voice barely audible. Elaine's expression didn't waver. Oh, I can, she said, and I just did. Security guards re-entered the store, their presence signaling that Richard's time was up. They moved toward him, and without further protest, he turned and walked toward the exit, his shoulders slumped. The once confident manager was now a figure of humiliation, his career in shambles. As Richard exited, the energy in the store shifted. Elaine turned back to the staff and customers, her voice calm but resolute. This is not just about today, she said. This is about creating an environment where everyone feels welcome, where everyone is treated with dignity. The tension in the store hung heavy in the air. Amanda, the white customer who had been caught stealing, was escorted out in handcuffs, her once confident demeanor replaced by humiliation. Customers whispered among themselves, some recording as the dramatic events continued to unfold. Elaine Carter stood in the center of the store, calm and resolute. The day had brought humiliation, injustice, and confrontation, but she had turned it into a moment of triumph. And yet, there was still unfinished business. Elaine wasn't done. She faced the police officers who had tried to throw her out without cause. Elaine glanced toward the two uniformed officers who had sided with Richard earlier. They stood stiffly near the entrance, their confidence visibly shaken as they realized the truth of the situation. The taller officer, who had spoken most forcefully, avoided her gaze, while the smaller one shifted uncomfortably, her face flushed. Elaine pulled out her phone and dialed a number. The room fell silent as she held the phone to her ear, her composed demeanor commanding attention. After a few rings, a deep, authoritative voice answered on the other end. Chief Jackson, Elaine said calmly, I'm at one of my stores, and I think you need to come down here. The murmurs among the crowd grew louder. Chief Jackson? Someone whispered. She knows the chief of police? Elaine continued, her voice steady. 2 of your officers responded to a call here and didn't bother to listen to my side of the story. They were ready to throw me out without any justification. I'd like you to handle this personally. The officers exchanged nervous glances, their postures stiffening as the weight of Elaine's words sank in. They knew the chief of police wasn't someone who took incidents like this lightly. Within minutes, a sleek black SUV pulled up outside the store. The chief of police, a tall man with an air of authority, stepped out and walked briskly inside. His presence immediately commanded respect, and the officers straightened instinctively. Chief Jackson approached Elaine, his expression calm but serious. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone respectful. "I came as soon as I could. What happened here?" Elaine gestured toward the two officers. "These two responded to a call from the racist manager," she said. "They took his word at face value and were prepared to throw me out without hearing my side of the story." The chief's eyes hardened as he turned to the officers. "Is this true?" he asked sharply. The taller officer stammered, "We thought—" "You thought?" Chief Jackson interrupted, his voice rising. "Your job isn't to think based on assumptions. Your job is to assess the situation fairly and uphold the law. Did you bother to ask Miss Carter what was going on before you acted?" The smaller officer shook her head, her voice barely audible. "No, sir." Chief Jackson's gaze was unforgiving. "This is unacceptable. Both of you will report to my office first thing tomorrow morning. We'll be reviewing this incident, and disciplinary action will be taken." The officers nodded meekly, their confidence completely eroded. The chief turned back to Elaine, his tone softening. "Miss Carter, I apologize on behalf of the department. This should never have happened." Elaine nodded graciously. "Thank you, Chief. I appreciate your prompt response." The story didn't end there. Within hours, videos of the incident were uploaded to social media. Clips of Elaine's calm confrontation, Richard's fumbling excuses, and Amanda's arrest circulated rapidly. The hashtags number Justice Served and number Stand with Elaine trended online as viewers across the world applauded her actions. Comments flooded in from people inspired by her strength and composure. "Elaine handled that with such grace," one user wrote. Another added, "This is a masterclass in how to stand up to discrimination." But the backlash against Richard was swift and unforgiving. His face, captured clearly in the videos, became a symbol of arrogance and prejudice. Posts calling out his behavior spread like wildfire, with users sharing their own experiences of similar injustices. Employers distanced themselves from him, and his reputation in the industry was tarnished beyond repair. Elaine, however, was celebrated. Media outlets picked up the story, praising her as a role model for standing up against discrimination. In interviews, she used her platform to advocate for change. If Elaine's story inspired you, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that make a difference. The store was finally quiet. The thief, Amanda, had been led out in handcuffs, her face flushed with humiliation. The crowd that had gathered slowly began to disperse, but not before whispering about the events that had just unfolded. Many still clutched their phones, eager to upload the footage they had captured of Elaine's powerful confrontation with Richard and Amanda's dramatic downfall. Elaine stood tall, her composure intact. The day had been a whirlwind of tension and revelations, but she wasn't done yet. There was still work to do. Back in the store, Elaine approached Tanya, who stood quietly by the counter. "Tanya," Elaine said gently, "I've seen how much you care about this place and its customers. You're the kind of leadership we need here." Tanya's eyes widened, tears glistening as she realized what Elaine was saying. "Thank you, Miss Carter," she said softly. Elaine's face softened. "Tanya," she said warmly, "I've watched how you handled yourself today. You showed restraint, kindness, and professionalism in the face of chaos. That's exactly the kind of leadership this store needs." Tanya's eyes widened, her hands trembling slightly. "Miss Carter, are you saying—" Elaine smiled. "You're the new store manager." With Tanya's promotion and new policies in place, the store began to transform. Customers returned, drawn by the promise of a more inclusive and welcoming environment. Elaine's vision had become a reality, proving that justice and dignity could triumph over prejudice. Tears welled up in Tanya's eyes. She tried to speak, but her voice broke with emotion. Instead, she nodded, her gratitude evident in the way she held her hands to her chest. "Thank you, Miss Carter," she managed to say softly. "I promise I won't let you down." Elaine smiled warmly. "I know you won't." The next day, Elaine called a meeting with the entire store staff. They gathered in the employee lounge, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. For many of them, the events of the previous day had been an eye-opener. Elaine stood at the front of the room, her posture confident but approachable. "Let me start by saying this," Elaine began, her voice steady and clear. "This store is about more than luxury. It's about the experience we create for every person who walks through those doors. Luxury isn't just what you can afford, it's about how you're treated." The staff nodded slowly, her words resonating. Tanya stood near the front, her new position giving her a quiet confidence she hadn't shown before. "We're implementing new policies," Elaine continued. "Policies that emphasize inclusivity, respect, and fairness. No customer should feel unwelcome, and no employee should feel unsupported. This is a place for everyone, regardless of who they are or where they come from." The room buzzed with quiet murmurs of approval. For some, this was a moment of reflection. For others, it was a fresh start. Elaine's gaze swept across the room. "This won't just be words on paper. This will be our culture, and it starts with each of you. Do you believe that inclusivity should be at the heart of every business? If so, hit that like button and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this." Elaine's words didn't stop within the store. The story of her confrontation with Richard and Amanda continued to go viral for weeks, sparking conversations worldwide. Media outlets reached out for interviews, eager to hear more about the woman who had stood her ground and brought justice to a place where it was sorely lacking. In one particularly moving interview, Elaine sat in front of the camera, her poise as radiant as ever. "This isn't just about me," she said. "This is about changing how we see each other. Luxury isn't defined by what you can afford. True luxury is about lifting others up, not tearing them down." Her words struck a chord with viewers. Messages flooded the comment sections of videos and social media posts. People shared their own stories of prejudice, solidarity, and perseverance. Have you ever experienced or witnessed prejudice in your life? Share your story in the comments. We want to hear from you. Back in the store, the changes Elaine envisioned began to take shape. The displays were refreshed to feel more welcoming and less intimidating. The staff received training on customer service that prioritized empathy and understanding. Tanya, in her new role as manager, led by example, ensuring that the store truly became a place where everyone felt valued. One quiet evening, after the store had closed, Elaine walked to the front of the showroom. The lights dimmed softly, casting a warm glow over the displays. She stopped in front of a glass case, the very one she had stood before on her first visit. Inside was the handbag she had once dreamed of owning. Its timeless design and impeccable craftsmanship hadn't changed, but what it represented to her had. It was no longer just a symbol of luxury. It was a symbol of perseverance, justice, and triumph. Elaine smiled, a sense of peace washing over her. She had faced humiliation, prejudice, and resistance, but she had risen above it all. The handbag was no longer a goal. It was a reminder of how far she had come and the lives she had changed along the way. Elaine turned and walked toward the exit, her footsteps steady and resolute. The store was just the beginning. There was a world beyond its doors that needed change, and she was ready to make it happen. If you believe in standing up for what's right and creating a better world for everyone, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful stories.